I've been doing shrooms for years, but always been afraid of higher doses. I finally worked up the courage to try 5 grams last night in a perfect setting. A little rental cabin in the middle of the woods. This cabin is awesome, has a giant window next to the bed, overlooking the woods. Never had a better setting. The trip really surprised me. It was very intense, with the shrooms kicking in much faster than past experiences. But it also was the most comfortable come-up I have had on shrooms, which was a happy surprise. Maybe because it happened so quick. Usually the come-up is really uncomfortable. This was not the case this time. I reached absolute bliss-level euphoria by hour 1 and had an incredibly emotional and moving peak. I was ugly crying for a good portion of it, but it felt so healing, introspective and personal. Also, the presence of the mushroom was incredibly clear and apparent, which I've had aspects of in past trips, but not to such a clear extent. By that I mean there definitely was the feeling of a guiding presence that communicated with me during the trip. It hit me really quickly with a profound feeling of relief that there was nothing to be afraid of. The peak was incredible and ineffable. It was very visual, but the mental and emotional aspect of it was more profound than the visuals. I definitely got some of the most intense closed-eye visuals I have had. But the emotional euphoria and feeling of love was so profound that is what I was focused on the most. I definitely had substantial ego loss, and time was doing impossible things. This made the come down pretty rough and confusing. This part of the experience was not very pleasant, but interesting looking back on it. It just felt weird trying to come to terms with being a human. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally started to come down and come to my normal sense of self. I spent the remainder of the experience around the campfire, eating some marshmallows and listening to music. The weather was perfect. The stars were out and looked incredible. It was a very nice end to the night and end of the highest dose of shrooms I have done. It was a much different experience than I expected, but also much more positive and less scary than expected. It also fascinated me how much past trips played into this trip. There were many moments where questions from past experiences would be answered or fulfilled, which I find incredibly interesting. Overall, super thankful for the experience. Highly recommend higher doses, but they are not to be taken lightly. Tripped on my own for the first time yesterday, though I do have lots of experience tripping already, only on shrooms. I'm up at the cottage with my family, including some extended family, so I had to be a bit sneaky with it. Woke up bright and early and brewed 5g of tea in the kitchen. My grandmother came out near the end, but it wasn't a problem. Following the brew, I packed up and hopped on my bike, headed into the middle of nowhere. After around 10 to 12 kilometers of biking, I found a decent spot. I crossed a big field and went into a small forest section, which divided the field. I crossed and another field. Found a good spot to sit and a tree to lean up against. Then drank the tea pretty quickly, probably all of it within 2 minutes. Threw on a blindfold and just sat there meditating, waiting for the come up. It happened relatively quickly since I was also on an empty stomach, so I was tripping pretty hard by about 25 minutes in, possibly less. I kept the blindfold on for quite a while longer, probably 45 minutes if I had to guess, and this was an intense experience. I found it amazing the visions I was having despite lacking my sense of sight. Lots of shamanistic stuff. I remember 5 spirits, of relatively human form, towering over me, playing drums, bongos maybe, and multiple female spirits asking, non-verbally, me to drink unknown fluids from these grail-like cups. It was extremely interesting. Though I would have liked to continue my trip in darkness, and no doubt will try this again, I decided at this point to take off the blindfold. The visuals were undoubtedly interesting and intense, but I don't think they are worth explaining, as it was really nothing too out of the ordinary for a mushroom trip. At this point, I began to question how I actually got into the spot I was in. I was seriously deep inside this weird little forest across this dry farming land, and I was just absolutely amazed that my sober self managed to get me into this place. I finally found where I stashed my bike, and thought it might be a good idea to head out of the forest and into the sunlight, where I could get a bit warmer and away from all of the bugs that were with me. Instead, I ended up relatively deep in thought for quite a while, pondering action, the reason that humans act in the ways they do, and the purpose for it. While English will always fail to describe the understanding I had in the moment, I began to think that life is much less about where am I right now, and much more about where am I going. What I mean to say here, and again, English is an imperfect tool, is that the ways in which we behave are often very random and without purpose. Eating without being hungry, going somewhere we don't want to go, saying something we don't want to say, etc. The mushroom made me ask myself why this is the case. Why do we act at all? What are we aiming to achieve, not only individually, but as a species? And what is the force which we believe is opposing this goal? While I do not have answers for these questions, I feel as though I understand them in a deeper way. I realized that it is these same questions, which the mushroom itself, being much older than us, has also been trying to understand and answer. And that for humans to think that these plants and fungi, which are older than we can even comprehend, do not have a means of communicating philosophical concepts and questions such as these is absolutely absurd. I would love to go into more detail about the rest of the trip, as it was all equally interesting and insightful, but I don't feel like writing too much more here at the moment, as I feel like I'm still trying to understand the experience. I will definitely be learning more from the mushroom and other psychedelic plants, fungi, soon in the future. Cheers everyone, happy tripping. I hope you liked this story, guys. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more future content.